a Glacial Lance Gemling Legionnaire character. This build is a blast to play, really nice single target, really good to clear, not too squishy, nice to move around and kind of just chuck out a one-button build. Really satisfying playstyle. So yeah, I'll go over everything to do with the build. Very quick disclaimer is that I have a couple hundred divines at least into this build. Have not tested it on a very low budget. I'll give you some alternatives to what I think you can use on lower budgets. So it's you know, you can play around with that, but I've not tested it myself. So be warned, there's risk. If you want something that is pretty good on a shoestring budget, I recommend the Tactician crossbow character that I had vid out before. That can be played on basically nothing, and it's really effective. So if you want something to play on mercenary before gemling, highly recommend Tactician. It's a blast. So yeah, without further ado, let me talk about the build. We are using Glacial Lance. This is a spear skill that works like this. You throw out like a single projectile like this. It leaves like a trail. And what you will notice is that after a while, the trail kind of explodes. So let me hover over Glacial Lance and we can talk about it a little bit more. So like I mentioned, just a single spear skill that gets thrown out. It can't fork, it can't split, and it pierces all your targets. So by default, it's actually just this initial attack. But what you're seeing is that it detonates afterwards, and that's because we are consuming a frenzy charge, and that triggers this explosion afterwards as well. So this explosion deals a lot of damage, right? So you can see here what the attack damage percentage is. It deals a lot more than just the basic Glacial Lance, which is not bad in and of itself, right? If you're doing a normal map, you will just feel that you one-shot everything anyways, right? But if you're doing 200% deli with additional map modifiers, you know, this explosion is really what's going to carry a lot of your damage. So we really want to find a way to be able to sustain our frenzy charges such that we're able to proc the explosion as consistently as possible. And this league, we get access to Gemling Legionnaire, and it's reworked advanced thaumaturgy node that gives you additional gem quality effects, right? So a lot of people are playing around with this, and it's quite potent on Glacial Lance. Because if I hover over this, it says that the additional gem quality effect is that you get a percentage chance to not remove charges on use. And what that means is that you know, you don't have to worry as much about consistently renewing the duration of the frenzy charges. If we look over here, mine is 81% to not consume the charges, or to not remove the charges at least. Which means that you are able to sustain them extremely well. I'm just going to hold the button down and you can see for yourself, right? So if you look at the frenzy charges top, right, you can see that it takes a while for them to go down, right? And the entire time you're generating more kind of passively. I'll talk about why in a sec. And then you're also generating more in the map itself by, you know, freezing and shocking enemies. So yeah, very you know, really fun interaction we get to take advantage of by just abusing this massive amount of damage that we get because of Gemling Legionnaire. So the second thing to be aware of in terms of what we're taking advantage of with this build is the fact that we are a spear build, which means we get to use a scepter, which gives you a lot of spirit, 133 in my case, and is also really OP because you get access to purity of whatever element, which means you get to socket even more stuff for free, right? So it's well over 200 spirit. It's really OP. But what that means is that, you know, we get to use the Scepter, and we'll also get to combine it with Absent Amulet. This is a new base type that gives you access to a single skill for free. In my case, it's Eternal Rage. This ordinarily costs 100 spirit, right? But we get it for free. So we're getting like, you know, 100 plus 100, 200 raw spirit. And then after that, you know, potentially up to 100 over here as well. So it's really, really nice. What do we do with all that spirit? Well, we stack buffs, and some of these buffs are extremely potent. So Eternal Rage, for example, is a buff that allows you to maintain maximum stacks of Rage. We have 62, and for every single Rage, we gain 1% more attack damage. That's multiplicative. So that's 62% multiplicative. And that gets scaled because we have 75% additional effect on that. So it's a lot of multiplicative damage. And then you combine that with Twinity, which gives you 7% more elemental damage per 30 affinity. Max is 300. So that is also more multiplicative damage. Lots of damage overall going on with buff stacking. We also have Herald of Thunder, Herald of Vices that we use for clear as well. Yeah, it's really nice to be able to have so much spirit. Yeah, that's kind of the core of how the build functions. We want to abuse these frenzy charge stacks, which have conveniently dropped off just as I was about to show them, right? But we just want to abuse the fact that we have really easy access to frenzy charges, right? And being able to sustain them really easily. Again, terrible timing for the example, right? But only so much I can do. Ordinarily, trust me, this is up like 100% of the time, right? I'm just not in a map, right? But yeah, um, we just want to abuse the fact that we kind of get access to infinite frenzy charges, right? And we want to combine that with lots of spirit. So that's the core of how the build functions. Let me just very quickly, before I start talking about itemization and stuff, let's talk about the tree. Like I mentioned, we want rage over here, right? So rage is the big scaling vector over here. I have this undying hate over here. And then sacrifice of flesh over here is for one-shot protection. It's really nice, highly recommend it. And then everything else I think is extremely standard. We have an Against the Darkness for extra damage as fire over here, and some chaos resistances. We have some mark effect stuff over here that's going on for our weapon swap. This is a one-button build, but on bosses I do press Sniper's Mark just for the little bit of extra damage. Can't hurt, right? So that's what I do. Yeah, that's the tree. Really self-explanatory, very easy. Just thought I'd show that off very quickly so I don't forget to do it later. And now let's talk about the actual meat of the build, the itemization, right? So how do we take advantage of all these interactions? We are a spear build, so we are naturally kind of using the ordained. You can use a rare spear. A rare spear will eventually be better. However, crafting a rare spear that is better than the ordained will cost you a lot more than the ordained. My ordained costs 15 divines. I can do everything in the game. It's fine. So just don't worry about it, basically, is what I'm telling you. You'll be good. Just buy an ordained, call it a day. Don't think about it until you have mirrors. Yeah, enjoy your damage. Scepter, I'm using Guiding Palm of the Mind. Use whichever Guiding Palm you want. You could even use a Sacred Flame if you want, but it has a negative interaction with Rakiatas, so just be aware of that. Like I mentioned, Amulet is kind of the core of how this works. The 3 mandatory affixes are Spirit, Level of Projectile skills, which you really need for damage, and then lastly, Quality of all skills. So you want all 3 of these. All 3 of those are mandatory, and then anything else is whatever you please. Gloves, +2 proj, and then some flat damage. The flat damage is very important. I would maybe even go for more. I have increased projectile damage, but I think flat damage is just better. Flat damage is super mandatory on both your rings and your gloves. I kind of went to your rings over to the rings over here, anyways. This is just because we are playing a one-handed weapon, which means that we need to gain access to a lot of flat damage that we lack on the weapon itself. So just make sure to get a lot of flat damage on both your gloves and your ring, and you should be good to go. The boots, very standard, lots of move speed, rarity, and resistances. Helmet is just rarity, max life, resistances, also max life on boots, right? And then chest piece is a Warrior Invictus with life, resistances, and spirit. Warrior is just really high value and just really good. So yeah. Go for all of these basically. I would say the really important part is just the absent amulet, right? Most other things are flexible, but that's kind of the core of the itemization. Make sure you get flat damage, gap resistances, get a decent amount of life, and you're good to go. Yeah, that's kind of it for overall, I think, how the build functions in terms of the itemization and the tree. And then just the basic skills. I don't think there's much left I actually really need to talk about in terms of how the build is actually functioning, right? Oh, actually, no, sorry. There is one thing. That's the anoint for the amulet. Thaumaturgical dynamism is why I'm generating these charges passively, right? So you passively generate power frenzy or endurance charges once every 5 seconds. It's skewed towards generating you frenzy charges. So more often than not, it will give you frenzy charges, but it's not guaranteed, right? Yeah, that's why I'm generating them passively in hideout, right? Make sure to get that as your anoint. It is a lot of quality of life. Highly recommend it. Yeah, I think that's it for the itemization. Don't think I've forgotten stuff over here. There are like specific intricacies that you want with like your idle slotting, for example, right? Doing some very, very specific things with making sure you have additional rage over here, making sure you have your Fox idle, your idol of Aramir, tech rods to have enough life regen to balance out, knowing some things about your moats and all. But everything kind of falls into place basically if you just think about things a little bit. I don't want to go into everything too much because it's not my job. I don't want this video to take up too much time either. So that's kind of how the core of the build functions. Last thing I'm going to talk about very quickly is I guess I'll actually just talk about how you can make the build get up and running on a slightly lower budget. So what I've showed you is a reasonably high budget setup, right? So I have some expensive support gems. I have a good amulet and some good gear as well, right? If you have gear that is not as good, what can you do to kind of work around this? Well, the number one thing that you need to problem solve for is this amulet, right? That's because the implicit of the amulet gives you 100 spirits. You need to solve for this very, that's the most important thing you want to solve for effectively, right? So number one thing, get an Alpha's Howl. If you can't get one of these, get an Alpha's Howl, right? So get an amulet with a high amount of spirit, some level of projectile skills, and quality of all skills. Those, again, are all mandatory. You really want those. So I would not recommend it before that. But if you can get an amulet like that on a different base type, what you can do instead of having a rare helmet is just put on an Alpha's Howl, and it accomplishes the same thing for you as having this amulet base type, right? So yeah, it's you can just use an Alpha's Howl basically, right? And it will be cheaper basically than crafting it this way, I think, because you can just buy like a worse one off the trade market, right? Where you can't really buy a worse version of this. It will still cost you multiple hundreds of divine if you're just buying it outright, right? So yeah, that's thing number one. And then the other budget solution number two has to do with the support gems that we're using, right? So I'll go over them very briefly. Number one, elemental armament. Obviously this is free, right? But it's just more damage. Rakiatas is the first expensive one. This one is not mandatory, but is the closest to being mandatory. This is because resistances is what makes bosses and some like rare monsters and stuff tanky in the game. At least one of the major contributing factors, and Rakiatas just completely flips that on its head and makes them a joke. So it is super OP. Definitely get a Rakiatas if you can. It is like the number one priority support gem that you need. Before you get Rakiatas, there are ways to go about solving it. Effectively on the tree, you can take some penetration nodes, right? So number one, this is some elemental resistance penetration, and then number two, some elemental resistance penetration. That's kind of how you can get around the need for Rakiatas, but Rakiatas will just is just better, right? So get a Rakiatas. You can also use Timu Rakiata, which is what's it called? Leopold Applause. This effectively allows you to penetrate negative, right? Which actually gives you a reasonable amount of damage against like normal enemies, right? So not monster or not uniques and stuff like that, right? Not bosses. Effectively, it gives you a decent amount of damage normally, but again, Rakiatas objectively just always better. So get a Rakiatas, right? That's the number one thing. Number two, Garricans. How can you problem solve for Garricans? Assuming you have your Rakiatas, we then move on to trying to deal with this. This is the next big priority support gem upgrade. This is expensive. I recognize that. The way I think you should probably go about doing this is no, sorry, I was on the right page. You can use a support gem called Pinpoint Crit that gives you 60% that's multiplicative extra crit chance and 30% less crit damage bonus. Ordinarily, that is quite a penalty, right? So 30% is a lot less, right? So how do we kind of deal with that issue? We can use a different pair of gloves, right? So we have Mulligara's Virtuosity, which states that your crit damage bonus is 250%. You can't change that. Which means that you just get 60% more crit chance with no effect to the bonus. So it works out such that it's quite a lot of damage. So probably the best thing to do if you can't get the Garricans. And then everything else I think is pretty optional. Varana's is optional. Her declaration very optional. I think everything else is you can work your way without, right? But those are the two mandatory things. Okay, this is my second time recording the video, and it was a lot shorter than the first time, so I'm trying to remember if there's anything I left out, but I don't think so. I think I just talked really fast. I'll put the PoE Ninja in the description. You can check it out if you're interested. Feel free to ask questions. I'll do my best to answer them or whatever. But overall, I'm just going to conclude by saying that this build is a blast to play. It is really fun, really satisfying to just like walk around and throw out these spears, right? That just explode and they travel way across the screen. They do a ton of damage. It's a lot of fun. I'll upload a gameplay video as well. Just note that I recorded the gameplay video when I had a worse version of this build. So I was missing a +3 on my amulet. I was missing I have a corrupted thing, so I was missing 2 levels on this, right? So just an overall a much worse version of the build. And I was still doing 200% deli splinter farming stuff with it was really easy, right? So